Yep, sounds great.
Great.
All right, you want me to kick this off?
Have a great presentation, everyone.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Really appreciate you guys all joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about how one of the largest, most tech-savvy, high-profile companies partnered with Tag1 to build this really innovative intranet that pushed new frontiers in Drupal. We're talking real-time collaboration and shared editing, active-active Oracle. Moshe and Lucas are going to dive into that shortly. Intros first. My name is Michael Myers. I started working with Drupal 17 years ago, was CTO of the first top 100 website on Drupal, and VP of Developer Relations at Acquia before joining Tag1. I'm joined today by two amazing and really well-known Drupal contributors. Lucas Heading is the core maintainer of the Migrate subsystem. He mentors the mentors who help contributors get started, and he's one of the top 50 contributors to Drupal 8 and 9. And Moshe is one of the all-time top contributors to Drupal. He's the maintainer of Drush, a core maintainer of numerous subsystems, and a member of the Drupal security team. Thank you guys both for joining and being here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Tag1, we work with a lot of technologies and are the #2 all-time contributor to Drupal, with the largest concentration of top core contributors on staff. We're also an enterprise supporting partner of the Drupal Association. In addition to that, we donate a full-time senior resource to help run all of the Drupal.org websites, infrastructure, and tooling that enable everybody to build Drupal. If your company benefits from Drupal, I implore you, please financially support the Drupal Association or a module maintainer so that Drupal continues to thrive. You can check out our team talks, our podcast, and blog to dive deeper into a lot of the things we're going to cover today, including real-time collaboration, our open source load testing framework, which made the site super fast, and decoupling applications. So what we're going to cover today, this was a massive project, so we had to cherry pick just a few things to focus on in the limited time that we have. I'll give you a quick background on the business case, the challenges of the old system, and the goals of the new intranet. Lucas is going to talk about our approach to prototyping, and then he and Moshe are going to talk about some of the really awesome features and functionality. Hopin has a Q&A feature over on the right-hand side. If you put your questions into the system, we'll save some time at the end, and if we run out of time, we'll hop over to the Tag1 booth. Just for some background context, this is a mission-critical system. It serves a very large active user base, and any given day, over 17% of the company is using this very actively. Teams, products, special interest groups, there's thousands of spaces or communities, whatever you want to call them, in the system. And together they contain millions of content pages in many, many languages. There's also over 500,000 files directly in the system, and at least that many that are referenced and stored elsewhere. So you're talking lots of users and lots of data. The original intranet was really awesome for many years, but it just couldn't keep up with the pace of the users and the organizational needs. The vendor had promised to address this and add features, but consistently failed to deliver. It just wasn't scaling, and user frustration was increasing, and this was impacting usage. Users wanted so much more control over the system, content they created, layout, everything. And, while intranets inherently by their nature are for collaboration, it really lacked a lot of the modern and necessary features to engage users, like real-time collaboration. And so, this company is known for major innovations. We're under NDA, so we can't name them, but you guys are benefiting from some of the awesome things that they do every day, and they need tools that can support this. For example, SaaS tools are really easily adopted by organizations, which enable teams to use the latest and greatest tools, and internally they're constantly building and standing up tools that they build to facilitate, their work. But what happens when there's, 5 different file storage systems? How do you know which two a team is using? And, what chat is the team you're trying to communicate using? And, why isn't the file, the box storage, file system and the Slack chat channel, and the team name, why aren't they the same things? How do I find what I need right now is a challenge. How do I remember where I put things is a challenge. And for a small team, working like this might work, but it definitely doesn't scale when you're doing, large global collaboration. And so they set out to design a system that enabled them to have and use whatever they needed whenever they wanted, but to mitigate all of this downside. Now, again, really large project, lots of stakeholders, lots of different ways to use this system. And so there was a very long list of must-haves. I cherry-picked a few here. It had to be open source. They couldn't be held back. They needed to be able to do anything with their software, and they have the capabilities to do that. Box files, Slack channels, internal project management tools, whatever it is, it needs to be able to integrate with, the internet has to be able to show data from those systems. As a user, you need to be able to find whatever you want wherever it is. And so there's this overarching search that digs into all these different systems and helps you get that. It has to be API first, this system, so that any device can integrate with it. And they did cool things like, take data for multiple inputs, repackage it, and put it back out there, as something that, other systems could use, even as like a widget, not just as code. And so, another thing is it had to be really easy to integrate and manage all of these systems. So, for example, let's say you were creating a new space or community and your group already had a Slack channel. Well, you could easily integrate it in that creation wizard. But if you didn't have one, you could just as easily create it while creating that group and community. So, it was like eating your cake and having it too. You could manage these things from all different angles, and it just, worked together. They really focused a lot on collaboration. I'm super excited about the real-time component we're going to talk about, and speed. Speed is tied to engagement, and they really wanted it so that if you clicked on a link before your finger came off the button, that next page loaded. So it's blazingly fast. Lucas, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk more about some of these features and our approach to building this application.
Thanks, Michael, for the great introduction. Welcome from Nicaragua, where I'm located. Wanted to talk a little bit about the approach. So we had a big project, and it was hard to keep everyone sort of up to speed on what was happening. When I say big, there was probably a core team of like 5 to 6 to 8 people, but then there was a huge number of stakeholders. And one person on the project would do something, and then at the end of 2 weeks, we would say, here's what we've done. And the way the project got funded was in an interesting, unique way. We only had 3 or 4 sprints at a time that we would get funded, and we had to sort of prove ourselves. We had to show through the case, through demos, this is what we got done, but then we couldn't just throw it away either at the end of a couple of sprints and just wash our hands. It had to be actually fully functional software. So that whole thing that we all hear about, sprints and Scrum and Agile and all, was really a big, big component of this project. We started out doing longer 1-hour demos that weren't necessarily very well scripted, and it was more just the developers sort of getting together, and that didn't go over well. That was not when we did our own self, and now this isn't very professional. We're talking about VPs, very high profile project. Many stakeholders. We switched over to doing a 30-minute, well-scripted, sort of even did a walkthrough before the walkthrough of some of the components so that we could show what we were doing. MVP, minimum viable product. We were always building towards something that was functional, giving some definition of what is actually usable software. We had to show something at the end of these demos, at the end of these sprints, so that we could basically win our chance to try the next sprint. Leads to some very, very pragmatic decision making. Okay, let's hard code this. Let's not hard code that, because we got to build on this next sprint. And constantly working towards something that was functional. And as we did this, we tried to pick quick wins. So one of the first things one of the things we really jumped into is this idea of real-time collaboration. And we already had something from open source to work on. It wasn't, so we started with something. It wasn't without any blank slate. We didn't have blank slate. So we had a working set of things, but it was not built to this client's needs and requirements. We had to customize it. We had to get environments for it. So initial demos would have been done with local environment, because in any large Fortune something company, you have this whole setup of a server process with change controls and process that can take weeks, and we didn't have weeks. So we're constantly sort of balancing, how can we do this, get a quick win, get some really good wows, and we did. With this one right here, we had comment after comment. We would, even though we would finish in one sprint with something, we'd kind of try to figure out a new little feature with it so we could sort of re-show it the next sprint, because it had such a great wow effect that it made some of the sprints where we might not have had, we had a softer sprint that sprint, we could still show real-time collaboration. So constantly trying to share and sell what we're doing, because even though you win the contract, even though this project was very sprint to sprint, we got our funding, you're always still selling yourself. This is what we did. By the way, we did this in this last 2 weeks, and in summary, this is what we did, right? This is what we all learn in Business 101. So besides real-time collaboration, another main component was third-party integration. We had a lot of systems that needed to be bolted into this intranet site. All of them, it seemed, at this point, seemed to be using OAuth 2 authentication. So we built an OAuth 2 authentication system for one of them. And then we sort of cloned it and built it out for Box, and then for Slack, and then for all of the other integrations. They had some unique requirements around using system tokens. So someone might ask, well, why didn't you use what was already out there on OAuth 2? It's because they were unique. They're a large enough organization. They got to set their policies around security, and they wanted to use a specific system with system token IDs and system accounts. We ended up releasing it as a sandbox project on Drupal.org. Back to we want to make sure all this stuff is open source. We don't want to incur a lot of high costs. That's what we ended up doing. We started using examples from GitHub for OAuth, but then we kind of went our own. There was this push towards open source because we don't want to have vendor lock-in. That was one of the issues they had with their previous intranet software. But interestingly enough, most of the integrations were closed source, things like Box and Quip and Slack. So it was you know, I digress a little bit, but while there was this push towards third-party integrations and open source, we still had to work with real life integrations out there in the world. Just to give you an example, so with one of these was Slack, we had to do integration. We built our OAuth, our OAuth authentication. That's the basic thing you have to do, and then after that, it's just kind of REST API. We started by building a controller that had some hard-coded values. Again, we had to have, by some definition, working software at the end of a sprint. So we started with a small sandbox app in Slack, and it wasn't even on the client's enterprise Slack system yet. It was just, I had one sitting over here on the side, and I used it. And that was the first demo. And then after that, we started to layer on top of it more and more features and functionality. Pragmatic, yes, we were very pragmatic, but we had some really cool results where you could, when creating one of these spaces or microsites, if you will, you would just say, I want to create a Slack group too. Here's the name that I want to have for it. And you'd hit write through the wizard and submit. And at the end of this, you'd have a nice little Slack group, and then threaded messages. As you started putting messages into Slack, it would sort of sync that data over into Drupal, and you would have threads. You'd have pinned conversations at the top, and it was all centered and focused on our intranet app with links off to Slack if you want to open it up into Slack. So another thing, and sort of this mantra of we got to build things, we got to have something to show, was it was a small change. We built an icon builder. Each of these microsites needed to have a persona. The little icon up in the top of the browser. How do you tell the site about React.js as opposed to canoeing in the Rocky Mountains, right? I mean, how do you tell the difference? Well, there's a little icon up there. And so we built this little small thing. Each one of these sites wanted to have this. And just a little collection of SVG, some web fonts. We found a really good place to start, throw in some background colors, and you have a really easy way when looking at your browser. And this, again, was one of those things that we just didn't have to be the complicated things. I started out demoing or showing in our presentation how we did this real-time collaboration, incredibly complex and hard. Slack, medium. This, not so much. But again, all of these things, when you mix them together and show it in a 30-minute demo, kind of start to show that you've got a lot of interesting things in the course of a sprint. Last thing I want to show. This is obfuscating of URLs. So they had a requirement. I'm not sure that it's really all that secure because obfuscation is not, in my mind, a lot of strong security. But security through obfuscation, InfoSec put out this requirement. We need to be able to have URLs that include a UUID, not node/7. So found a small patch to core. I'm not ever sure that this thing is ever going to land without a little bit of massaging from the community. But it's easy to maintain. It's a couple of lines. So pick your things. Try to find things that are easy to build within Drupal, and that's what we did. We built really complex down to even small little patches to core, and we would constantly be demoing these and getting feedback. It wasn't just hey, look at me. Every time we would demo, they would say, well, we liked that, but can you change this? So great project to work with. Let me hand it over to Moshe, who's going to talk about some other things we worked on.
Okay, hi everyone. Moshe Weitzman, longtime Drupal contributor in Boston. So one of the things I want to talk about is integration with LDAP. LDAP stands for the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. I'm not sure most implementers of this thing would call it lightweight, but whoever made it up called it lightweight. And an LDAP server is something you'll find common in large organizations. And it's a real central piece of infrastructure that maintains all of the user accounts for an organization. So we're talking about the employees, the vendors, part-time staff, that sort of thing. And in addition to just the user accounts, it has lots of lists of what the different projects are in the organization and who belongs to each project and what their role might be on that project. This Fortune 50 already had an existing LDAP server, and it had this information of who's on what projects. So clearly we needed to integrate with this thing, and we did. We integrated it both in terms of logins and also in terms of what groups would be in the application and who's a member of each group. So you can keep going, Michael. So instead of synchronizing all of the LDAP information into Drupal, which is really how the group module wants to work, all of the list of groups and all the memberships are in the Drupal database by default when you install group. That's great for many use cases, but wasn't great for this one. We needed to slave off of LDAP. So what we did, we looked at a service that is in the group module, and we overrode that service. One of the nice features of Drupal 8 is it's easy to overwrite code that's been encapsulated in a service. And And what we did in this service was that we went and looked at the user session. And in the session at login time, we had populated the list of LDAP groups that this person belonged to and what their role might be in those groups. And so, once we had our session in hand, we could pretty much return all of the memberships for the group. And we fulfill the contract of the group membership loader. So if you look at the Drupal database and the group module tables, you'll find nothing in them. This Fortune 50's implementation, everything comes out of LDAP in memory. And a little nicety that we had to add here is that we provided a user interface to the LDAP server. So there's a web UI for adding and removing members to your group. Well, we wired that up so that the add member and remove member methods on group would do LDAP operations instead of Drupal database operations. And another nicety is that since we had easy access to LDAP, we could pull the user avatar information out of LDAP. And in this case, we did sync it into Drupal. We synced it into the private file system. And thus it was available to be used with Drupal image styles for small thumbnails and large thumbnails and so forth. All right, let's keep going. The other big project that I want to talk about is this Fortune 50 implementation did not use MySQL like every other implementation I've done over the last lots of years. We used Oracle as our backend for Drupal. This really came about because this customer is familiar with Oracle, has already paid for Oracle, likes the performance and reliability of Oracle. At some point, the client is always right. And so we went ahead and did a proof of concept using Oracle instead of MySQL. We had a great jump start with this. If you go to the project called Oracle on Drupal.org, you'll see a driver there, a PDO driver that works with Drupal 8. It took us a couple weeks to sort of further polish what was on Drupal.org and show a working Drupal site that was backed by Oracle. We were able to contribute some of our improvements to the Oracle driver back to that project, and they've been incorporated. And some of the improvements we made are still in our fork and not yet incorporated into the project. Not because the maintainers aren't paying attention, mostly because we ran out of time to prepare the improvements into issues and have them, advocate for them on Drupal.org. But they are open source, and if you guys get these slides, you can follow this link to GitHub, and you'll see like our fork of the driver there. So yeah, I'm happy to report that Drupal works on Oracle, is performant on Oracle, and is reliable. So that speaks a lot to the database API that Drupal has on top of all of its databases. Yeah, I see one question that I can answer now. Did you use Oracle or PR environments or functional tests? We did use functional tests using Drupal test traits. All those tests had Oracle as a backend. PR environments being like preview environments like Lullabot, tugboat style environments. No, we didn't have those environments set up on this project. So that's it for me.
Awesome. We have a few minutes for questions. We're really close to the end of the session. Anything you guys want to chat about, please throw it into either the chat or the Q&A section of Hopin, and we'll head over to the Tag One booth after this and be available for a little bit if you want to keep the conversation going.
The third-party OAuth thing, I think it's earlier in the chat here. It's called, if I scroll back, OAuth 2 Token Manager for managing OAuth 2 tokens. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, in case the question is about like more scope than just OAuth 2 tokens, we did not get a chance to contribute back like our Slack API calls that get the pinned conversations and so forth. You know, in a sense, there's not that much to contribute there, but that's not part of the OAuth 2 token manager.
Correct. It was a pretty meshed into the. I mean, there was a service. And nice ways to decouple things, but it was still pretty hard coded as far as their specific implementation and what they wanted to see on that integration. There is a Slack API module on Drupal.org that I would recommend looking at if that's what you're looking to go towards. I've used it as well now, and it works well.
Awesome. We're about at time. Really appreciate everyone joining us. Moshe, Lucas, that was awesome. Thank you. If you guys want to continue the conversation, please hop over to the Tag One booth. Please remember to support Drupal, the DA, module developers, and enjoy the rest of DrupalCon.